So welcome everyone to this session on colonial and decolonial sustainabilities. It is a pleasure to welcome this group of scholars who are going to be talking about critical approaches to sustainability. We have 4 speakers. We are this is a panel that is a very special panel for us because it was crafted in a conversation we had with Dr. Nelson Maldonado-Torres, who is a decolonial thinker who works with the Black House Collective in Soweto, co-chairs the Frantz Fanon Foundation, and teaches philosophy at UConn Store. So when we began having a conversation about this event, Professor Maldonado proposed a conversation with 2 collectives. The first collective is the Black House Collective, Soweto in South Africa. We also have members from the Possible Futuresf Collective. So this is going to be a very engaging conversation. We will be able to listen to multiple perspectives on these issues. And now I'm going to present the speakers. So we have Dr. Maldonado, who I already presented. We have Ayabulela, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing well her last name. Mhlahlo is a PhD student at the University of Connecticut Philosophy Department. She's a member of the Black House Collective-Soweto in South Africa, where she works on community projects that pertain to epistemic, environmental, and racial justice and decoloniality. We also have Anna Denardin, who is a designer in sustainability and regeneration with Possible Futuresf, experimenting with forms of creative expression that staunchly reveal and demolish toxic narrative perpetuated by decolonial cultural hegemony. And finally, we have Luiza Oliveira, who is a decolonial health strategist with Possible Futuresf, seeking patterns and paradigms to dismantle coloniality and make way for holistic and traditional systems of care, bringing critical insights from her practice as a neurologist. So welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Juan Carlos and the organizers of this event. We are grateful for the kind invitation to join you, to reflect about various meanings and to reflect of sustainability, different approaches to it, and critical reflections on it. And before saying something more about ourselves, I mean, more than we are we come from different places and work with different collectives and organizations. And right now, representing, from South Africa, Philippines, Brazil, Puerto Rico, the US. And so with that in mind, I would like to start with a comment from all of us about standing in solidarity with students and others calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. We're standing as members of organizations in various parts of the Global South that are actively engaged in advancing the unfinished project of decolonization. And we want to express our personal support, collective support to the students at Columbia University, New York University, Yale University, and many other campuses throughout the United States who are engaging in peaceful resistance and civil disobedience on their campuses, are calling for a ceasefire and for a stop of what South African attorneys at the International Court of Justice, among many others, have characterized as no less than an ongoing genocide. Hundreds of students have been arrested already, including over 100 in the last 24 hours. Also, in the last 24 hours, about 300 people were detained near Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer's home in Brooklyn, New York, where, according to various news outlets, and I quote from The Guardian, thousands of mostly Jewish New Yorkers gathered for the Seder, a ritual that marked the second night of Passover this week, as they shut down a major thoroughfare to pray for a ceasefire and urge the Senate Majority Schumer to end U.S. military aid to Israel. Continue quoting from the newspaper, the mass arrests came after the Seder rituals. Speakers included journalist and author Naomi Klein, Palestinian activist Linda Sarsour, and several Jewish students suspended from Columbia University and Barnard College over the protests that have rocked U.S. campuses in recent days. Rabbi Miriam Grossman from Brooklyn led the prayer before the first cup of ritual wine, saying, "We pray for everyone besieged, for everyone facing starvation and mass bombardment." As I woke, close quote, as I woke up and watched the news this morning here in Atlanta, I heard news commentators completely ignoring the actions and arrests of Jewish protesters in Brooklyn last night, instead focusing on the protests on university campuses, which were then characterized in criminal terms as anti-Semitic and as friendly to terrorism. We oppose the criminalization of protest and join those who assert in different ways today that no state is justified to engage in genocide, whether it is majority Black, Indian, white, or Jewish, and that it is of the utmost importance to assert today that Black lives matter and Palestinian lives matter. So with that statement from us, we want to say that our session will run in will follow a fluid format, in which we're going to present ourselves and our work relating to decolonization and as a critique to colonial sustainability in different rounds of discussion. The presentation will also include a visual component, and the visual is a collective product from Possible Futures, the collective that is part of our ongoing collective discussions and sharing of ideas. It's like we are building our own space of in-betweenness, a space where we're bringing insights from various geopolitical sites, multiple projects and collectives, going through critically the modern Western academic complex and Sustainability Inc., as Possible Futures call it, and combining insight from that process, using the written word and the image. I should also say that this conversation, that in a way, this presentation is also based in a collective paper that will be published this summer. And it's a paper, mainly the leading voice and the leading authorship is coming from Possible Futures. This is more than anything Possible Futures terrain, and we're going to be led by them in this process. And then Ayabulela and myself will contribute as we are learning with them and working with them in these topics and sharing our ideas and building something together. So we want to kind of present in a dialogical, fluid format. Some of what we're doing also with not simply reading the essay, the paper, the chapter that you can read later this summer, but actually adding another layer that is not in the paper, which is the visual component that emerged organically out of this collaboration and discussions, and it has been put together by the Possible Futures Collective. And so I would like to then pass it to Luiza from the Possible Futures Collective to introduce herself and say more about her. Luiza.
Thank you, Nelson. Yes, my name is Luiza, and today, together with Anna, we are here as part of Possible Futures crew, which also includes Samantha, Christina, and Athena. But it's now 3 a.m. where they are, and this is why they are not present with us right now. Possible Futures is a collective committed to radical decolonization, centering global South perspectives and experiences. We are committed to supporting the cultural and food sovereignty of what we call global core, systems and cultures preserving and protecting what little that remains of decolonial planetary and societal health. We come from various professional and personal backgrounds, and yet we share similar experiences of the delusion faced when trying to understand twisted logics behind dissociative systems that work for the benefit of few at the cost of everyone and everything else. For each of us, it was impossible to grow up in the colonized Global South without realizing the ubiquitous and omnipotent effects of European colonization across our physical, cultural, and societal contexts. We find ourselves surrounded by abuse, death, and collapse, senseless products of the flippant puppet string of coloniality being tugged on by our global ruling classes, seeking ever-growing profit, comfort, and privilege. We continue to experience colonial ethnocide and its long-ranging consequences daily in personal and professional spheres. Colonization categorizes everything, separating our lives into little compartments to fit coloniality boxes of divide and conquer. Existence outside of these little boxes is not allowed. Being is not allowed. Anna?
Thank you, Luiza. So, as Luiza was explaining, we in the Possible Futures Collective started to become familiar with a kind of disgust sentiment arising from witnessing wrong and incongruent aspects of normalized cultures and formal structures. We could recognize the same patterns at times also in Global South and indigenous contexts, where coloniality continues to invade and occupy even spaces and structures that were meant to hold the line. We see the importance of committing strictly to the practices of navigating heritage confusion, decolonizing the self, relating and reconnecting to context again and again, so as to avoid perpetuating harmful dynamics that feed coloniality in the end of the line. So in our different experiences of colonial crisis, we find ourselves rejecting the pressure to comply, to not cooperate with an ongoing process of colonization that continues to collapse other worlds, even as it itself buckles irreversibly under its own weight. So in making sense of these systemic injustices, oppression, and suffering, it is necessary to seriously explore the internalized oppression, power over manipulation, and normalized gaslighting that pervades colonized cultures the world over. Seeing these patterns repeating themselves in different contexts, we observe that there is a consistent denial and dissociation that feeds systemic illness, and we started to realize that formal, institutional, and even civilizational structures don't hold the answers that we seek. Our experience of and witness of abuse, trauma, injustice, and the perpetuation of systems that cause this violence leads us only to decolonization. And when we talk about colonization, we are talking about mechanisms of power, control, violence, and coercion with direct effects on systemic pain and suffering while continuing systemic profiteering and wealth hoarding, with manipulated narratives justifying why the system should work for some and not for others, as Luiza mentioned. So this is what we refer to as colonization. And this is why, for us, from Possible Futures, decolonization is not a project with a deadline, but it is an intergenerational process of commitment and recommitment, learning to shed our own internalized coloniality through interrogation and non-cooperation, focusing on radicalization, meaning nourishing more our own roots, to reclaim the complexities that coloniality continues to flatten and destroy around and within us. And with that, I don't know if I pass to Aya or back to you, Nelson, to introduce her.
Please. Aya, please.
Hi everyone. Ayabulela Mhlahlo, but popularly known as Aya. I emerged from the Black House Collective in Soweto. I'm also a PhD student at UConn. I'm here representing the Black House Collective. We are a Soweto-based, or should I rather say Johannesburg-based, Black conscious, Pan-Africanist and decolonial group in South Africa. Our focus is mainly on epistemic justice, amongst other types of aims for justice. As you all know, South Africa has an atrocious history with colonialism and apartheid, and we think about coloniality as a continuum, just as the decoloniality school of thought, posits. So apartheid and colonialism in our framework and its hold on knowledge is a continuum that has far surpassed, the 94 liberation efforts of our liberation movements. And so we work to redress, anti-Black and colonial structures of epistemic violence. We draw our strength from the trajectory of Black people's strength for true liberation and a desire to quench a 400-year-old thirst for Black liberation thought and a desire to redress anti-Black structural problems by way of several community programs. Our focus is on education towards social justice. We seek education and agitate for a free egalitarian community through which the indigenous who have been dispossessed can redress and repair hundreds of years of violent encounters with the savagery of colonial apartheid racism. Inspired by the Black consciousness movement, we as the Black House Collective aim to redress and address anti-Black structures of violence in Black communities in and around Soweto and in other satellites throughout South Africa. We are committed to the work of reviving and promoting the Black radical scholarship with the purpose of defying white racist epistemologies and colonial pedagogy currently disseminated by South African schools, universities, and society writ large. We concern ourselves with the systemic and institutional racism where it pervades private and public institutions, communities, and the Republic in general. So yes, that's the work we do as Black House Collective, and that's who we are.
And I am originally from Puerto Rico, and many of you maybe all know that Puerto Ricans are colonial subjects of the US regime. So the question of colonization and decolonization come very strongly and naturally to many of us. I have had the opportunity and pleasure and honor to work in South Africa for now a bit more than 10 years, and a majority of which have been in connection and association with the Black House Collective. And so it's been really wonderful and amazing to learn about Black consciousness in South Africa, the anti-apartheid struggle, and the long history of liberation of Black people in the continent, taking by the hand and engaging collaborations with the members of the Black House Collective there. And so in that process, I got to know what is it that you can find about at the universities about these matters, and what is it that you find the traditions of combativity that are found mainly outside of the universities in places like the Black House Collective. I should say also that it has been a real pleasure to now be in a more recent conversation with the Possible Futuresf Collective. And in a way, both of these collectives are kind of examples of what I've been thinking in terms of combative decoloniality, vis-a-vis decoloniality light that has become largely metaphoric and largely purely academic in university contexts. And so actually, to go back to Anna provided a formulation of the possible futures view of decolonization, which I think that it describes also well what I've been trying to convey with the notion of combative decoloniality in conversation with Fanon's Pressure of the Earth, when she said decolonization is not a project with a deadline. And in the academy, everything is projects with deadlines. and proposals, right? But it is an intergenerational process of commitment and recommitment, learning to shed our own internalized coloniality through interrogation and non-cooperation, focusing on radicalization, nourishing more of our own roots to reclaim the complexities that coloniality continues to flatten and destroy around and within us. So I think it is in that spirit, and this is the spirit that connects what we have been doing, and we thought that it would be important to put to make that explicit and explain our common ground. Also, I should say that, I am now, as I said before, entering into the terrain of of better understanding and critically interrogating the category of sustainability. I have spent some time undermining, criticizing, having kind of a campaign against a related concept, which is resilience. And so now I find myself fascinated by entering into these other aspects, not only investigating the coloniality of resilience, but also now the coloniality of sustainability. And Possible Future here is taking the lead. And with that, I will pass the microphone again to Luiza so that she tells us more about what we're going to do.
Yeah, thank you, Nelson. Yeah. As Possible Futures crew come from various professional backgrounds, as we were saying before, even though our very different experiences, we find many things in common, such as facing similar harmful, unhealthy patterns, to go beyond our local context and our initial careers. And then when we found ourselves in various spaces within sustainability complex, we witnessed the same harmful patterns being repeated over and over again. From microcredit finance to sustainable building and urban design to permaculture association, like our larger collective. In all of them, we found ourselves again in structures that fail to address social and environmental injustice because they are inherently colonial and overwhelmingly white. To counter this, we must recognize that other sustainabilities existed prior to and alongside dominant white Western sustainability as it developed in parallel with globalized capitalism. In this presentation, we will be talking about the hegemonic sustainability industry that we refer as Sustainability Inc. That means corporate sustainability associated with areas of academia, environmental activism, anything that draws a paycheck for interventions in the broad realm of sustainable development or climate change. Sustainability Inc. and Mainstream Regeneration Inc. discourses insist that the fundamentally unjust and destructive world order that we exist within currently can be saved. It just needs some little tweaks. Still seeking a single story of progress, development, and success, framing the different stories into a single path forward. Still thinking that indigenous people need to be saved, while a romanticized form of indigenous wisdom is given the responsibility of saving the modern Western civilization that unalive it in the first place. Still thinking that SDGs are good, but the informal sector is disorganized or uncultured or bad. Scandinavian sustainability is portrayed as good, but Western, African, pre-colonial practices are portrayed as dangerous or savage or bad. Other sustainabilities continue to be invisibilized in favor of modern and Euro-centered ecological narratives that dictate what changes through a process of word construction by which heterogeneous and pluriversal words are erased and made unfeasible. Regeneration without decolonization ends up being just an expensive performance for the Elysian classes that perpetuates coloniality and exacerbates planetary systems collapse. Within this logic, Sustainability Inc. expands Western culture domination over other worlds, perpetuating systemic oppression and trauma. Through colonization and the normalization of this kind of violence, those in power continue to propagate these harmful behaviors without being held accountable. And the moral element attached to Sustainability Inc. creates excuses to not think about how things came to be and how violent the system is and who is being harmed because of it and at what cost. Arising from these reflections and discussions, in 2022, we from Possible Futures piloted a long-form course for professionals to interrogate coloniality within Sustainability Inc. that we call Intro to Decolonial Sustainability. This course is now in its third iteration, with registrations for the fourth cohort currently open. We see how important it is to be able to facilitate safe, uncomfortable spaces for Sustainability Inc. insiders and loyalists to connect the dots between coloniality and internalized oppression. Understanding how colonial trauma is passed through generations, shaping knowing, being, and doing in various contexts and systems. You can find more information about the course at possiblefutures.earth, where you can also see that we have 2 other smaller workshops with registrations open, Intro to the Intro, that provides a glimpse into the fuel and content of Intro to the Decolonial Sustainability. And Should I Stay or Should I Go? That is facilitated by our coaches and ask if more of the same in sustainability industry is the answer to our prayers. And I pass to Anna.
Thank you, Luiza. So, as Professor Nelson mentioned in the beginning, within our research as Possible Futures, we found him and his work on the coloniality of being. And from there, we decided to reach out and from our collective discussions, the opportunity to write together about colonial sustainability appeared. So we wrote an article together called Colonial Sustainability, Tracing the Sustainability Industry's Ecocidal Lineage from the Doctrine of Discovery. And this article we wrote together is what will be guiding the narrative of today's presentation. But instead of presenting the content of the article from rational perspective or conventional way, we wanted to present it in a more artistic way. So that's because the content of the article is actually centuries old, and yet people still are unfamiliar with the correlations made in it. So we wanted to present from another perspective through character creation. And this character is almost like an archetype. It does not refer to a specific person. And while it is initially quite jarring, we didn't create it to attack anyone, but to hopefully, by creating this character that is almost cartoonistic, exaggerated, to make some patterns more visible and relatable. And we say this in an attempt to avoid perpetuating the narrow discourse that traps us in polarization based on attacks, defensiveness, and distraction. So all of us who are or once were deeply immersed in the sustainability narrative may identify ourselves with different parts of this character. Coloniality is like this parasite that infects everything it touches, creating functional zombies that support the perpetuation of this disease, sometimes without being aware of it. And we use this concept to explain how coloniality manifests its rotting effect inside the sustainability industry. This character is called the world eater, based upon a concept developed by Dunlap and Jacobson in 2019-2020. So at a first glance, the world eater may seem benevolent, helpful, and striving towards a better world. They can be your friendly sustainability consultant that seems to have things together, is professional looking, ready with all the solutions you could ask for, always on the right side of the story, explaining how you can take action to be the change in this challenging moment of history, asserting with gusto their theory of change, ready with a toolbox full of analytical frameworks that promise outstanding results that can save our planet. So if you can share the first slide, please. Thank you, Stuart. So then after a few minutes and a few encounters with this character, seeing how they interact with the people they are working with, the politeness and altruistic glare starts to fade, and you start to find some raw edges of dissonance. At first, you think to yourself, maybe they're having a bad day, right? Nobody's perfect after all. But then behaviors start to repeat, and you say, well, maybe it's just a coincidence. This benefit of the doubt gets brought up repeatedly, and then you finally come around to acknowledge that this may not be a coincidence. It is a pattern. And this person is zombified. And not just any zombie. This is the world eater, the very same beast who ate humanity's indigenous diversity. So if you can pass to the next slide, please. So this is the world eater when you zoom out. And for us, this is the work. It's to get really good at understanding the zombies we are dealing with, their stages of zombiehood, and to try to experiment with appropriate interventions to deal with this infection. So the world eater traces the sustainability industry and its dominant discourses' colonial roots in the Holy Roman Empire's expansionist imperialism, to the paternalistic white supremacy of the European colonial project, and finally, to the obfuscation of this continuing expansionism through institutional sustainability rhetoric. And we will be discussing all of these themes today. But in identifying colonial ideology and governance structures as the basis of today's sustainability industry, we aim to reveal the violent and pervasive nature of coloniality and how it dictates power structures, particularly in relationships engendered by its own mechanisms. So we present this development of the world eater through history, tracing the narratives, mechanisms, and systems that build upon one another to advance colonization, that we perceive here as an infectious disease. The character multiple arms allude to the different things that the world eater is doing simultaneously, and the different ways coloniality pervades structures and bodies like a parasite. And as you can see, this image has many elements. It's very maximalist. It has so many symbols that we addressed in the article, but for sake of time, we will discuss only a few of them today. Nelson, over to you.
Thank you, Anna. And what we thought we'll do to make this presentation more interactive, more fluid and dynamic is to stop here for a second, for a minute or a minute and a half, and ask you to look at the image that is on the screen carefully and to select one or two pieces with which that you find particularly interesting, intriguing, you know, whatever, the ones that you react the most, again, connected to the topic of sustainability, right? That you look with attention and that you think about one or two of these pieces there. And then we're going to ask you later to share with us why you chose that, right? Why did you choose that image? Okay. So take your pick. And with that, cool. With that, then we're going to pass into the next image. And this is the image that has been chosen, right? We have selected 3 different parts of the larger image, and we want first to target this one and to ask you, and then I will let, after we hear from you, I will let Luiza and Anna take us and explain and even say the theme that represents these images. But first, we thought that we would ask if any of you shows any of those 2 images when you were looking at that, and if you can share, maybe someone can help us quickly with the microphone. We have we have another microphone here. If you can just quickly share why, of all the images there, what came through your mind? Anna, Luis, and Aya, tell me if you cannot hear, okay? The idea is that you, all of you.
Okay, wow, okay, that's pretty deep, but well, I'm clearly Muslim and I was Catholic, so the chalice, I know that kind of symbolism, but it's kind of like the dynamic that when you work on people's faith, which is something very deep and embedded into them, and you kind of take advantage of them through that kind of a structure, in that you take advantage of their goodness and their pure intentions, and people who are greedy for power can often fall prey to those ideals. So that was what struck me.
Thank you. There was someone else. Someone else chose this. Yes, if you could. Yes, we can get to. And
I also consider myself a recovering Catholic, but I also, I see it from both sides in the benefits that the church did afford me through education. So for me, it was that's why the chalice kind of drew me to that one. But still reflecting though, so maybe somebody else can reflect.
It's across the board.
Yes.
Like I'm, experiencing that. It's not that I just happen to know.
thank you. Thank you. So I let Luiza, maybe you can tell us what is the theme of this first round, of this first image, and give us your impression, and then we go to Anna, Aya, and I conclude with a brief remark.
Yeah, thank you. I think choosing to present an image, and an image like this, like there's more than one intention that is in it. And I think also opens the possibility for other people experience to find their own. But thinking of this, what we call the religious arm, there is this aspect that was already mentioned in the audience of when you create this invalidization, or what is right and proper, and this dissociation, that is created to colonial trauma of human and nature's human from other humans, and it's portrayed in a way that we see through the religions, and how this shapes the understanding of value, what is important, what is good and what is bad, feeding into this polarization, emptying complexity of the discussions, and understanding of the challenges that we face in life, that are intrinsic to our own beings, like in this coloniality, polarizing often makes the association of complexity as something that is too hard to understand, and complexity, when complexity is part of our every cell and every interaction, you know? So I think this, for me, brings to this this dissociation, you know, that is portrayed through the doctrine of discovery. We can go more academic on that, but I think this is my personal attachment to this image. And I pass to Anna.
Thank you, Luiza. So as Luiza said, and we wanted to open the interpretation of the images because there are many possible interpretations and many valid perspectives. My perspective of the first image of the callus and the worms is inside talk about death and the death hidden behind the savior narrative of this is what we call this set of arms, the legitimizing coloniality to Christian supremacy. So as Luiza mentioned in the article, we mentioned different historic events that kind of perpetuated this colonial narrative, one of them being the doctrine of discovery. So this series of papal bulls that were issued to allow the colonizers to enslave unbaptized and non-Christian captives taken on raids. So this granted full remission of sins to members of the Order of Christ who took part in any expedition against the enemies of Christianity, authorizing legal immunity for those committing colonial crimes. And for me, this speaks about this violence, right? This ethnocide aspect. While the incense holder is more like a metaphor of exorcising the savages, like cleaning the space, that for me talks a lot about epistemicide, or like more subtle ways of erasure, invisibilization, and salvation that were ushered in this evangelization process and its eventual successor, that is the development narrative. So when you hear phrases like, quote unquote, human societies need to follow Western development models to attain the standards of living that Europeans presently enjoy. Or if we adapt this to the sustainability discourse, maybe it's something like human society needs to follow Western standards of sustainability in order to save our dying planet. So there is an imposition of systems and structures through this saving narrative, but also cooptation or erasure, as I said. So Aldo Leopold, Rachel Carson, the Club of Rome's Limits to Growth are often mentioned as the pioneers within the climate movement and celebrating for ringing the alarm around planetary systems collapse, even though indigenous leaders across the global south have been ridiculized, targeted, killed for centuries by colonial police and military actors for warning the public about the ways they understood the planetary ecological balance was being tipped over. So there are many elements here of categories of worth, and I think Aya can bring a lot to the discussion, so I will pass to her and not take too much space.
Thank you so much, Anna. Yeah, I mean, it's really important for us to begin our critique, with, a critique of like, or re-invoking the decolonial critique of Christian supremacy, because, at our point in history, or where we are right now in history, we tend to forget that, the roots of colonialism, specifically the symbolic element of colonialism, begins and ends with, the Christian mythic model. And so for me, and I think also for BHK, because we're interested in aesthetics and we're interested in this symbolic level of epistemic violence, it's really important for us to constantly remind ourselves of the power of the Christian myth, or the mythocratic regime of Christianity, and how important and fundamental of a fixture it is to colonialism and to colonial structures of power. So we understand that power is not just, expressed through, say, the material elements of itself, such as institutions, markets, and economies and the state, but power is mostly, or, at least in our critique, it's mostly sort of like collected and cultivated in the symbolic realm. And the success of Christianity, at least in, its encounter with its colonized subjects, is infusing its symbolic field into their society and infusing it in their epistemes. So the way that we understand the world, or the way that we generate knowledge of the world, specifically of our natural environment, is collected from this sort of like Christian symbolic, matrix. And then the way that we will resolve the issues we have of the world is also sort of drawn from that. So, to start our critique, with the problem of the reigning problem and the continuing problem of Christian supremacy, and particularly the Christian mythocratic regime, is really important for us. And for me, this is really important for two reasons, from, the Black decolonial and anti-colonial tradition, specifically the one that we espouse in South Africa. It's important on two levels. First of all, Frantz Fanon's, critique of the Manichaean ethic in the colonial atmosphere, and how this Manichaean ethic is not only dangerous for how we organize human societies, but it's really dangerous for how we organize relations between human society and the natural environment. And more importantly, especially for our discussion today, led by Possible Futures, how we then frame the problem that we as a colonized and colonizing society, have, like how we frame the problem of how we have degenerated nature, or the natural environment, and how we are to redress that. So that's still within the Manichaean split that is introduced to the colonized by, the Christian mythocratic regime. And the second important part of this critique, for us at least, as, BHK, and our arm, is, how Steve Biko sort of analyzes, the invention of colonial states from this sort of like Manichaean ethic, and from, the creation of, these grand white supremacist and, Christian, societies that sought to sort of like constantly recirculate colonial power regimes. So one such is, for example, the Afrikaner Calvinists, and their myth of being the chosen people who sort of come into this terra nullius, which is, in their framework, at least, a terra nullius that is South Africa, and they are to enjoy the spoils of it, right, through various levels of struggle. And so, the native or the indigenous people of that land are seen as parts of the natural environment, and the natural environment is then, according to that myth, to be manipulated and shared amongst the chosen people, who are the Calvinists. And so, the problem with that is not just only about, the dehumanization of indigenous peoples, but it's also about the reduction of the natural environment into mere material. And then again, the way to resolve that issue is to, to further materialize nature, either through a positive paradigm like a sustainability, or a more negative paradigm like, extreme capitalism. And so it's really important for us, to constantly think about the power of, like, this Christian mythocratic regime at various levels, and how we are reproducing the problem of colonialism by constantly appealing to this symbolic field. This is something we've identified in South Africa, especially the Black radical movement. I think Fees Must Fall has been the most recent expression of addressing this problem, because one of the main tenets of Fees Must Fall was to, address the symbolic field in South African universities, and understanding how central symbols are in our construction of knowledge, the knowledge of ourselves as societies, but more importantly, the knowledge we have with the world around us, or the knowledge we constantly reproduce about the world around us. And I think that this part of of our presentation and the part of the critique is important, because it constantly reminds us that we need to address and seek to sort of revise the symbols that are constantly perpetuating and these central fixtures in imperial power, and also in constant degradation of entire peoples and entire natural environments. So I think for me, coming from BHK and particularly South Africa, it's never a light moment when we speak about the power of Christian mythology, not just the religion. It's more importantly, and I think that's my takeaway. It's more important. The more important part, the symbolic regime, or the symbolic power of Christian mythology, and how it reproduces that symbolic power even through these kinds of critical models like sustainability, and why we need to constantly decolonize that fold of power. Prof.
Thank you, Aya. And I wanted to add that make sure to kind of highlight or emphasize that this is not purely kind of an anti-Christian discourse, let's say, right? It's an effort to try to trace the historical foundations of what we see today as sustainability. And part of this critique of how, or part of this analysis of how Christianity in a way helped to create part of the bedrock and the framework for many of the logics that we're seeing now, have been explored by Christian theologians themselves, and Christian theologians of liberation. And one of them was my teacher, Enrique Dussel. And Enrique Dussel was a philosopher, a theologian, and a historian. And he has a very strong critique of what he calls the transformation of Christianity into Christendom in the context of the conversion of Constantine, Emperor of Rome, to Christianity, and how in that context Christianity becomes quite a different kind of institution, and a set of ideas begin to develop around an imperial form of Christianity that kind of begins to remap the entire known world according to categories that draw from certain Christian elements, but also from the interest of empire making and empire expansion in the process. And it is through that genealogy, right from there, we end up with the expansion of Christian kingdoms. We get to the Iberian Peninsula, and from the Iberian Peninsula, we get to the rest of the world. So there is historically a direct connection there. And some of the theologians of liberation have been very critical of that shift in the transition from Christianity to Christendom. And I think that part of the analysis that is presented is that in this paper is to say that we need to look carefully at those shifts under the institution of Christendom, which means the following. We have been in this during the morning here, different times, different speakers have been rightly talking about the importance of history, right? Looking at not only sustainability, not only in relation to policies or technique of management, but about the importance of history, the history of the very fields that are engaging in sustainable discourse. But I think that here we have the historical part, right? So it's clear for the collective but I think something else is being brought, because just focusing on looking at the past, but how and through what categories are you going to look at the past? What are going to be the interpretative tools and the critical concept that you're going to use to interpret that past is as crucial as looking at the past itself. Actually, perhaps even more crucial, because you can easily look at the past and very easily get the wrong lessons from it or reproduce it. So history, we have to be careful with certain reification of history as such. And in this case, we see history, if you want to go around, we see religious studies, if you will, right? And we see theology, we see Native American studies. There are a number of reflections, critical reflections about the papal bulls, and about the doctrine of discovery coming from that area. Aya talks about analysis of symbols, one can add semiotics. And there you see that we require not only looking at the past of certain documents, we need to equip ourselves with multiple set of conceptual tools and critical tools, some of which have been elaborated in the academy, but some of which actually have been elaborated outside the academy. And when you look at the work of collectives, that they are working through these categories, but without necessarily submitting themselves to any given discipline or method, to come back to the discussion that we were having this morning too. So we have two other themes that we want to present. We realize that time is very short. We would have needed about 3 or 4 hours or 3 days for this, I don't know. But what we can, I suggest that we do, folks, is that we present the other 2 set of images, and then we ask the audience for some quick reactions. And then we take, maybe no more than 1 minute. And then if you don't mind, I will refrain myself. Maybe I'll say something at the end. I will just kind of managing time to make sure that we don't go too overboard. If the organizers give us perhaps, 5 to 7 minutes after the hour, we can use that, but we have to be very attentive to time now. So, okay, we can go to 4:15. Excellent. So then we have more than 1 or 2 minutes. So let's see. Let's go to the next image, because this represents another team, and now we're going to do it more succinctly. But we want to begin. Who chose this image? When you look at the original image, who? Perfect. That we have 2 or 3. Let's go quickly. Okay, 1 second. Please, could you share why?
Because especially the dirt, you think about death and you think about how easy it is to cover things up. Naturally, you want to cover things up with dirt, with soil when something bad happens. So that's what I thought about, and how, it takes bones, sometimes years, sometimes hundreds of years to decompose, depending on the soil, depending on the sand. And so it all depends on what you're trying to cover up and how it resurfaces.
Thank you. Yeah, Maribel.
I chose this in relation to the previous one because the presence of death is really overwhelming, but at the same time, the presence of life, kind of trying to emanate and trying to not just resist, but actually survive. The encampment, the whatever, alambres de púas, I don't know how you say that in English, but, the sticky little things. What? Yes, thank you. Barbed wire. The shoe for me was the Statue of Liberty in a way, kind of with all the putrid stuff coming out of it. So the critique was going in many different places. The right-hand side, the soil is the bones, so once you die, all the rituals and going under, 6 feet under, but then becoming soil, which is what really gives life again. So I chose this also in relation to the iconographies of history of Christianity in the previous one.
Yeah, and I saw an image of consumerism, products, money. So I think that captured my attention. Yeah.
Thank you. One more.
Thank you so much. It's with this image, it just brings consumerism and the whole idea of people committing sins, trying to cover up their sins by throwing money at it or doing something else, trying to escape accountability, stuff like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anna, could you tell us what the theme is and your impressions? We'll begin with you.
Sure. Thank you, everyone who shared. I really appreciate your perspectives, and the Statue of Liberty thing was really interesting because I haven't thought about that before.
Only Puerto Rican.
So this is the image to represent the part around imperializing environmentalism through hegemonic institutionalization. And yeah, for me, this image talks a lot about imperial violence. So we have this spiky boot smashing life on Earth and ecosystems degraded with money flying, that for me speaks a lot about greenwashing, trying to hide the sins, as someone mentioned about the shovel and the dirt and the bones, and this colonial map with blood that I think this image talks about the past, but also talks about the present, because this could also be, for example, map of a site of a development project, for example. So we have the context of settler colonialism that in many ways destructed local ecologies in favor of systems that facilitate settler survival, or maybe even more importantly, comfort. So European colonizers degraded native ecology of the lands they colonized, committing ecocide and importing European plant and animal species, many invasive in their new contexts. So it speaks about this intentional project of ecocide at, as I said before, also co-opting indigenous epistemologies to further ethnocide and clear the way for colonial profit. And in the post-colonial era, we have the ecological conservation and environmental sustainability projects that have been implemented by wealthy actors in all nation states to monopolize this epistemic material ecological resources of the global south in an inadequate attempt to redress colonial ecocide. So traditional indigenous knowledge and skills continue to be co-opted to improve entrenched coloniality by misappropriating them into industrial, academic, pharmaceutical outputs that are inaccessible to the victims of the ethnocide. And when we look at the institutions, since this part's about institutionalization, like for example, the UN that created the SDGs and dictates so much of the narrative of sustainability, and we look at the cultural and epistemic leanings of the people, we see that people there are folk who have amassed social capital, intellectual capital, political capital within a country, and most leaders, officials, and representatives, even of global South nations, actually are actually educated in the global North, and few have been brought up outside of the white dominant culture, and fewer still take on a decolonial lens, seeking justice and sovereignty, due to this personal beliefs in the promises of Western civilization that point to development and prosperity. So, yeah, complex image, a lot of meanings there. Luiza, would you like to complement?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Anna. I think I'm going to mention something that a part of the image that is very intentional about the maggots under the boot, of like why it's there and not in other places. Because I think this, as we were talking, like this zombie archetype of that perpetuates Sustainability Inc. It perpetuates even without understanding that it's perpetuating. Not always, but often. And I think there is this element of continuing this violence that often is shown as something that happened in the past or is in the name of greater good, but it's very present and very harmful. I think this image shows how colonizers literally drew imaginary lines and installed so-called democratic governance systems that often mimicked less than thin-air colonial management. Those installed governments were populated by political interests aligned with their previous masters. This is done in order to protect the colonizers from immediate retaliation from ongoing anti-colonial rebellion forces. The identity of the nation is controlling fantasy based on the colonizers' definitions, not the people's, masquerading as independence and freedom. Would a nation of people who are sovereign and free really be interested in subscribing to government systems that subjugate and oppresses them from centuries? Yeah, I'll stop here and I pass to Aya.
This image is very useful for for people like me and members of the BHK, because it really goes to the center of the colonial problem, the center of the colonial paradigm and the crux of power, which is the invention of man and the anthropocentric age that comes with coloniality, backed up by, of course, the Christian or Christendom symbolic field. What you see constantly, a motif in this particular image is some appendage of man's body, right? Symbolizing man's reign, not only over, nature and his manipulation of nature, but more importantly, his reign over history and his reconstruction of what life is. So as you can see, it's the arm holding the paper, the newspaper, the foot trampling down, and with that blood plasm, or this sort of blood fluid sticking from it, and the arm again with the shovel. So man is such a perversive concept in colonialism and coloniality, and it's really the root of the kinds of problems we're seeing today in the environmental sphere, and in accord with Possible Futures critique, also with colonial attempts to sort of redress its own problems via sustainability. So the root really of this idea of man is from philosophers like Fichte, Hegel, Kant, with the collapse of God, so to speak, brings in the age of man who reigns over power, history, and knowledge, and mostly also has the power to transform nature into material. I think when we critique really and continue our critique on this sort of idea of man and how man ascends to symbolize all of power, we can at least begin to see how, by constantly instantiating the power and the centrality of man, we are reproducing the problem, even if we have good intentions at redressing the problem. And therefore, we are sort of like reproducing colonialism and coloniality itself. And so for me, and for us as Black House Collective, as we're interested in the Black and decolonial intellectual tradition, I think radical scholars like Sylvia Winter and Nelson Maldonado-Torres, who is here, are important in helping us understand really the center of the catastrophe, that the rise of human over nature, and therefore the power we've given man to transform nature into material and to transform every element of life and reality into his property, has put us to this position and has put us in a position where we are constantly regenerating catastrophe. I think this is the important part of, Possible Futures critique of Sustainability Inc., or what they're calling Sustainability Inc., is that even attempts to redress the problems, actually regenerate and recycle the problem of coloniality and how we have colonized the natural environment. This also speaks to some of our work that we've done as Black House and the work that is done by our associates back in South Africa. So one of our senior members, Brother Mambule, has a greenhouse project in central in CBD of Johannesburg, where he is educating the community there on how to make the city green effectively, or how to practice what we are now calling sustainability through an indigenous lens. And the indigenous is not only, normally we think about the site of the indigenous in, what we now know today as rural areas, which were also petitioned and portioned out in South Africa by the very same apartheid regime, and it portioned it as Bantustans. But what he's trying to propose, and I was supportive of his work at the Greenhouse Project in CBD Johannesburg, is that indigenous methods of sustainability can be practiced in the city, can be practiced in rural areas, it can be practiced anywhere where people encounter, nature. And nature is not just seeing the green or the greenery and whatsoever. It's really about the material that has been manipulated from the earth to construct these cities and to construct these sites of quote unquote civilization, which is basically colonial civilization or conquest. So, these kinds of projects where we democratize sustainability and we sort of like and we place the root of sustainability in communal work and in indigenous work wherever we may find ourselves, an attempt to sort of dematerialize our natural environment and and sort of like operate from an ethic where we do not center the Anthropocene or the anthropocentric man, where we do not center materialism or we do not center the concept of man, but we go back to, or at least we resuscitate ethics, indigenous ethics especially, that see us in community with other species and other members of the planet. And so, yeah, this image is really important in terms of displaying the center of the issue, but also showing us that, we have tools and we have, practice models or models of practice rather, that can help us deconstruct the symbol and recreate new symbols or new ways of associating ourselves or replacing ourselves as equal members of this planet rather than as members who are above the planet or who've given themselves custodian over the planet and therefore are reproducing the colonial paradigm and expanding the colonial paradigm that started with the symbolic supremacy of Christendom and Christianity in other epochs. Yeah. I'll pass on to Professor Maldonado-Torres.
Thanks, Aya. I just want to say that, just in case, to be clear, the first image that you saw, the concept that was used to explain that or to convey that was the religious arm, ARM, right? And this one is the imperial arm. And the subtitle is Imperializing Environmentalism Through Hegemonic Institutionalization. So it's like the first part required kind of a particular set of tools and forms of analysis, historical, religious studies, philosophy, symbols, and so on. This one is requiring analysis of institutions and of imperialism and so on. So it requires other kind of areas and fields and concepts. And so what I'll do is I pass to the third. We have very few minutes now, but I would like to know your reactions to the third one. We will tell you the third arm, if there is, what is the third title. And I think that if my colleagues allow it, I will just pass it to Anna to say in 1 minute a comment about the last one and stop there because we don't have time to do the full round. Okay, so the next one, Anna, you will be the representative. This is the image. Who shows this image? Perfect. Stuart, you show the image so you get to talk also.
Thank you. I was drawn to this because of the connection to some of the introductory preamble with the zombified eyes, but because I think the imagery of zombification, as it were, is very evocative, and I think translates and something that people can connect with, this idea that people are following along, perhaps somewhat unintentionally but mindlessly, with these hegemonic structures that you've been laying out in some of the other elements. But I can see here also some of the elements of consumerism and self-reflection.
Thank you. And maybe quickly, I can say that, this topic about zombie, it is investigated in the literature on coloniality. And actually, even Fanon, so long ago, wrote about those who create colonial societies as the living dead. That's the term he used. Anna, tell us the name of this image of the concept and some thoughts about it, and we'll conclude there.
Thank you, Nelson. What a responsibility to speak for everyone. I will do my best and I will try to be quick. But I think this piece here talks about the sustainability narrative per se and the manipulation, basically, like the masks behind. So there is a remote control that talks about the manipulation of narratives through propaganda mechanisms and the spectacular displays of performativeness that we see at some of the COPs and like greenwashing, all of that. But there is also this piece about the world eater applying makeup and training a fake smile in front of a mirror, like trying to appear normal. But when you look in the zoom ins, you see these fiery, greedy eyes and this salivating mouth that for me speaks to like wanting to climb the corporate ladder, get recognition, leave a legacy, kind of behind the good intentions, there is like this personal or professional gains or benefits or gain social capital by this, and this SDG spin to signalize virtue, right? So it's kind of a performative that this monster is like playing, and this creature that is a zombie but doesn't know that it's half dead. So yeah, kind of overall, that's kind of the idea we wanted to express here. Nelson?
Thank you, Anna. And the title that Possible Futures put for this is The Industrialization of Colonial Sustainability. So this is a depiction of that process. So thank you so much. We'll leave it there.